Um, it's a reference to this guy called Henry Ford, who was quite an influential figure. He was building a company who basically enabled
cars to use as they are today. They basically made cheap cars, like the Model T. And Henry Ford was famously quoted as saying, any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants, so as long as it's black. And it was so he was like kind of a funny guy. Yeah, so I work at Facebook. This is my third year at Facebook. Before joining the company, I worked at a small startup doing Python and infrastructure stuff. I also had some experience working at FinTech with C++ and distributed technology. So yeah, I'm one of the maintainers of Black, which is a code formatter, if you've never heard about it. And I also own Facebook's adoption of the code formatter tool. If you want to talk to me about something after the talk, I like code formatting. I like programming languages in general. And if I'm not like coding, I play video games. I'm the team captain of an Overwatch team, so I play professionally as well from this presentation. So if you've never used code formatters before, I'd like you to introduce you to the concept. I'd like you to understand what their advantages are, and I'd like you to consider using code formatters in the future. If you've never heard about Black itself, but have heard about and used code formatters before, then I want to understand what makes Black different. And also I'm going to explain how the Black code style looks like. And if you've actually written a code formatter before, which some of you did, I talked to you before, I also have some bits and pieces for you. I'm going to talk to you about what the challenges are writing code formatters and what you should definitely pay attention to if you want to write your own. Cool, let's get started. So why code formatters? Back several years ago now, PEP 8 was written. PEP 8 is basically a document that describes how to write pleasant Python code, I guess. And one of the insights it delivered, I think, is code is read more often than written. And it's actually written by multiple people, usually, with multiple completely different approaches and goals. And so the problem is you have these multiple people contributing with different code styles. And if you want to read the same code base, there's this not terribly big, but still a little bit of a hurdle reading code that's in different styles. Your goal when reading code is to understand and not to figure out how it's formatted. So reading is basically the obstacle before your goal of understanding it. So you really want these multiple peoples to write code in the same style to alleviate this problem. But getting people to follow instructions is a hard thing. People are terrible at following instructions. So this is why you should use code formatters. So people figured out, okay, yeah, people write different styles. So let's use linters, which is an already existing technology. Linters are good for catching code anti-patterns and localized problems and to inform developers about these problems. And you can think of code style as code anti-patterns probably. If you write code that's not in the desired code style, then it's an anti-pattern. So you can use linters like pylint or flake8 to detect these problems. And these two specific linters actually implement a bunch of lint rules that are related to code formatting, like this one. They warn you if you put white space before closing brackets sometimes. They warn you if you put white space after opening brackets sometimes. They warn you if you put white space before opening brackets sometimes. And the list goes on and on and on and on and on, right? So this is kind of terrible. Linters basically try to enforce your code style by taking a bunch of large objects and bludgeoning you to death with them. It's not ideal. So people realize this is a problem. So they wrote autopypate, which is a tool that basically goes and identifies your formatting violations in the same form as a linter. It has a bunch of rules. These are all the rules that it uses today. I don't really want you to read them. I just wanted to show that there are a bunch of rules already. So autopypate does and applies these rules, and then once there's a problem, it automatically fixes your code to no longer have these lint rules. Now the problem with autopypate is anything that does not violate these rules will not be touched by autopypate. So anything that does not violate these specific rules will still have different code styles. So it doesn't really solve the problem. And you can argue one of the ways to solve this problem is by adding more and more rules. Let's say we add 5 or 10 times more rules as this. Good luck maintaining those, by the way. But even if you add 10 times as many rules, who can guarantee you that it will cover all possible Python code bases? No one really. So let's take a step back. Let's forget about linters. They're awesome for detecting localized issues and code smells in general, but for code formatting, let's forget about them for now. The real problem is you have a bunch of ugly code, and you want to generate pretty code from it. And the insight here is, let's do the same thing the Python interpreter does. It goes and parses all this ugly code into a nice structured format called a syntax tree, and then once we have this nice structured output, we can write rules to generate pretty code. It's not super complicated, but this is the basic insight behind most modern code formatters. Prettier does this, Go format does this, Rust format does this, even YAP does this, which is another Python formatter. So the cool thing about this is, if you do this, there's no more need for linters checking code style, because by definition, your rules are going to enforce code style. So this is where Black comes in. Black does the same exact thing. So that's all cool, but like, what makes Black different? Well, Black puts a significant amount of emphasis compared to other code formatters, other Python code formatters at least. Black puts a significant amount of emphasis on correctness. And what I mean by correctness is Black makes sure whatever the input code is syntactically equivalent to the output in terms of syntax trees. So what Black does is it parses the input, builds the syntax tree like I showed you in the previous slide, generates some output, and then parses that again and builds the same syntax tree and makes sure those two syntax trees are equivalent. It adds a little bit of overhead, so it's not super fast, but you can turn this off if you feel really safe. The second thing that makes Black different is focus on idempotency. And what I mean by this is most of the code formatters out there for Python, apart from Black, if you run them on the same code base twice, at the second run, they will output slightly different code than after the first run. This sucks because it's hard to understand what's going on. Black makes sure that after it generates some code, it also runs itself on the generated code again, and if there's any differences, it just blows up saying, oh, you should file a bug. You can also turn this off if you really want to. And the third thing is, and this is where we start losing some people, is Black is not really a code formatting tool. It's more like an implementation of a code style. So there are a bunch of built-in opinions about how Black formats code, and there's a relatively minimal amount of configuration. This is very helpful, obviously, when writing Black itself, because you get to do what you want. But for people who are using Black, the real benefit of this is if a code base is blackened, it looks the same exact way, no matter where it is. There are no configurations, there's no slight variations to the style, it looks the same. And the last thing Black focuses on is simplicity. Again, this is something that's very useful when you're writing the tool itself, because the idea is there are a bunch of relatively simple rules that take the syntax tree and generate code from it. But again, for people who are using Black, this is important because if you see an output, it's very easy to understand why Black chose that particular output if you know the principles behind Black, which I'll show later on. The other interesting thing about simplicity is Black tries to make sure that input formatting does not influence output formatting. The only thing that influences output formatting is the actual syntax tree, which is what the Python interpreter cares about. So slight variations in white space and stuff like that does not really matter, with a few exceptions. Cool. So let's talk about the style. If you think about it, code formatters, the main thing they do is they take long lines and they make them shorter. This is what line wrapping is, basically. Black's approach to line wrapping is simple. As I think Black's approach to everything is mostly simple. So the idea is, if you have this wonderfully long list, and you've broken it up into 4 different lines, but really it does fit into a single line, then black takes it and fits it in a single line. Simple as that, right? What if you have an expression that does not fit on a line? Let's say this one. Well, black's approach in this case is it will try and find places where it can split the line. Let's say these brackets, it goes from right to left, finds the first bracket it can split on, and then split the resulting expression into 3 lines. Before the bracket, inside the bracket, and after the bracket. So this is what you'll get. If all 3 lines fit the line length, then we're good to go. We're done. Let's move on. If they don't, then you can apply this rule multiple times. So you can look for the next bracket and try splitting on that. And there are other types of splits that black does. For example, the limiter split. So this is a function definition, for example. And if there's commas, for example, inside the brackets, then black can also split on the commas as well. And the way that works is, again, if it doesn't fit on a single line, then it will try and split on commas, and it will put every single expression before a comma on a separate line. So this is a style you kind of get for function definitions that don't really fit on a single line. Point out here. One is the frowny face over there, the sad face, which looks kind of weird if you've never seen this kind of code style. I think it's kind of important because if you notice that the function arguments are on the same indentation level as the function body. So if the closing bracket would be somewhere else, then it would be very hard to distinguish between the argument and the body. So putting it there is super helpful to understand what your code is doing, which is kind of the point of code formatting in the first place. The other thing I want to point out is that comma at the very end there. If your Python version supports this, which is I think 3.6 and onwards, black will always put trailing commas at the very end of function signatures, because if you try and add more arguments after that or remove arguments, the resulting diff will be only 1 line, which helps code review. All right. So what's line wrapping without talking about how long your line length should be? You won't see this word very often in this presentation, but this is one of the things that's actually configurable in black. You can say when you call black how long your line length should be. There's obviously a default, and it's 90-ish. And the reason it's 90-ish is actually explained in the README. There's if you go to Black's README, there's a link to a YouTube video with it, which explains kind of the original rationale, why it should be 90-ish. But the actual default value is not 90, it's 88. And the reason it's 88 is because we just ran a bunch of experiments across Facebook's millions of lines of code. And we found that going from 80 to 88 makes code much more readable because like more stuff fits on a screen, but not too much. But going from 88 and above, there's no real difference in most of the code. So we kind of ended up choosing 88 there. There's also a link to the video in the slide notes. All right. The other thing I want to talk to you about regards to style is strings. String formatting is kind of a much argued about point. So Black standardizes on string quotes and string prefixes as well. You know, you can like prefix your strings with B, an R, an F. So Black standardizes all of that. They're all lowercase and in one specific order. And it chooses double quotes as the default string style. Yeah, the reason it chooses double quotes is because we're biased towards English, to be honest. English has a bunch of apostrophes, like this. Oh, sorry, no. So it does default to double quotes, but it will choose single quotes if it results in less escape sequences in your string. Because ultimately, no matter your quote style, the goal of Black is to make it easy to read strings, and backslashes don't make your strings to be easy to read. So yeah, as I started explaining, the reason for our double quotes is we're biased towards English. So you write a bunch of strings like this, and it just results in less escaping in that case. And also, the empty string with double quotes arguably looks easier to understand. If it's just single quotes, you can't really tell if it's a single double quote or two single quotes. This is much more straightforward, I think. So yeah, this is obviously a point of contention. We've received lots and lots of feedback about this. This is Black's opinion, and if you find it hard to write double quotes because on most keyboard layouts you have to press one more key, feel free to just type single quotes and Black will also format them for you. Cool, and the last thing I want to talk to you about regards to style is Fluent interfaces. So there are a bunch of libraries, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, like ORMs and stuff, that like to use lots and lots of function calls in a single expression. This is called function call chaining or Fluent interfaces. And early on, while writing Black, these code bases were kind of terrible, to be honest. Like Black produced almost unreadable code. So we had to specialize some logic in Black for this. And what we realized is, you know, I talked about the comma splitting on function arguments. If you do the same kind of logic, but on dots, so if you have a dot after a function call, you try splitting on that, then this is what you'll get, which I think is pretty readable, to be honest. So we have some special logic in there for Fluent interfaces. And yes, it's not perfect, but one of the goals of Black is to be simple, and I think this strikes a pretty good balance between simplicity in terms of both simple to implement, simple to understand, and it's kind of pleasant result most of the time. All right, enough about style. Can we start using it already? Oh, by the way, this slide is called Life is Better Painted Black, because Łukasz, who is the original author of Black, did an amazing talk at PyCon this year. So you should definitely go and watch that if you want more history or insights into the development journey. And Łukasz, if you're watching this, hi. So can you start using this? Can you start transforming your life? Well, Black is on the verge of coming out of beta. We've kind of promised a stable version for quite a while now, but it's really coming. There are a bunch of simple bugs we need to iron out because we don't really want to release something that still has a bunch of bugs. But if you do want to start using it right now, it's super easy to get started. Just pip install Black, and it's safe, as I mentioned. It makes sure your AST is going to be the same, like the syntax tree is going to be same. There are a bunch of built-in safety checks to make sure it will not destroy your code. As a data point, we use it at Facebook for tens of millions of lines of code every single day. So it kind of works. There are also a bunch of like Profilic open source projects using it. You can read all about that in the README. Cool. So assuming I convinced you to start using it, there are a bunch of things that you should know while making sweeping changes to a code base, like changing the code style. So I want to give you a bunch of adoption tips. So if you want to get started, you have two approaches. You either go incremental, which means you let people who touch the code apply the new code style, or you go, well, we're just going to format it in one go and just generate one big commit. And I would encourage you to actually go the latter way. So just bite the bullet, generate one single commit, get the pain over with, and then let people who contribute later on also run Black to make sure the code style is enforced. And the main reason for this, we tried both actually at Facebook. And the main problem with the incremental approach is you're going to mix together style changes with functional changes, which makes it hard to review code because it's hard to understand what actually changed in the logic. And on top of that, there is no real disadvantage to one big commit as long as you make sure that the code's logic stays the same, which Black does. So there's no real downside of doing one big commit. Having said that, if you do one big commit, it's going to be scary. It's going to touch most of your code base, but don't worry. Again, Black has built-in safety checks to make sure your code will not get broken. It's still worth skimming through that large commit because there might be some places where you don't actually want to apply formatting. And you can use the format off, format on comment blocks to disable Black in specific places in the code base. Anything between those two comments, Black will not even touch. All right, let's say I convinced you to do one big commit. The next problem is, well, everything now blames to this one commit. Like if you do git blame, everything just points to your code style change commit. That's not very useful. It kind of destroys the point of version control, right? Yes. At Facebook, we were in the fortunate situation of owning our own diff review pipeline, so we could just change our diff review code bases and tools to ignore these commits. And in open source, there are several efforts going on right now to make this easier. Like if you're using Mercurial for some reason, then HG annotate has a command line argument that lets you skip particular revisions, and then you can skip those commits. For Git, you're kind of out of luck, but there's this thing called Git hyperblame, which is a third-party tool that is like git blame, but with the ability to ignore or bypass certain commits. This is exactly what you want. What you basically do is you have your giant commit, you have your format commit hash, and you put it in the .git blame ignore revs file. Maybe even check it in the repository. In fact, that's a pretty good idea. Check it in the repository, and then you just call git hyperblame, and the result is the same exact thing as if you would call git blame. Actually, it looks like this. Difference between the output of hyperblame and git blame is those little stars over there. Those stars have skipped commits, so they are not actually written by those people, but they are part of the formatting commit. Now, this sounds too good to be true, to be honest, and it's a little bit true. The problem with git hyperblame is it's Python 2 only. I know, it's terrible. And it comes with Chromium repo tools. So you have to kind of go through a bit of pain to install it. But the good news is, as I was trying to figure out if this feature exists in Git or propose a new feature for Git, like literally yesterday, this commit landed in Git, which is basically the same thing we want. So coming soon, Git will be able to do the same thing without needing to install any kind of tool. So that's awesome. This landed literally 24 hours ago. Cool. So that's the problem with the whole big commit thing. So once you've done all of that, you have a formatted code base. You want to make sure new contributions to the code base will not disrupt this code style. And the very basic thing to do if you have continuous integration, which I hope you do, then you can run black check on your code base, which will error out if there's any code style violations. This is designed to be included in a continuous integration pipeline, so you can have Travis run this and then make sure it flags pull requests that don't adhere to the style guide. This is kind of the last line defense. You don't really want to rely on this because it takes a long time for someone to finally write a commit it, push it, and then later on, oh, I have to make changes to code formatting style. So this is a last resort. If you want to catch style violations earlier, I recommend you check out pre-commit, which basically does not let people even commit to a repository that it's enabled without adhering to the code style. The downside of it is you have to kind of get everyone to install it if they want to contribute to a repository. So that's nicer, but still not the best experience because you still are writing code, you're trying to commit it, and then you realize, oh, I need to apply the formatting. So the best possible experience, just use your editor. There are editor integrations for everything by now. It's really a liberating experience. I highly recommend you do the editor integration. You just, like, when I started using this, it was a transformative experience for me. I just write my shitty code in my editor, like 200 characters long. I press save, and it's suddenly nice. It's awesome. It's awesome. Before anyone calls me out on it, those icons are in no particular order. They're the same size. Anything else is your imagination. All right. So this is my favorite part. This is where I get to rant about things. Let's get started. So Python is an amazing language. And I know much more since I started contributing to Black about Python than I ever wanted. Turns out in Python, you can omit some parentheses. This is kind of obvious if you think about it, but if you don't, it's not. And optional parentheses are very helpful to structure your code. And it helps algorithms like Black's to make sure it formats your code in a nice way. Let's look at an example. So take this code. This is actually from Black itself. It's just a simple if statement with two clauses joined by an and. This is how Black formats it. This is not very obvious if you just look at it and don't actually read the code. It's not actually obvious that there are two clauses there. If you look at the right-hand side, this is much more obvious what's going on here. So if you put those brackets after the end, then it's easier to read. And then actually, this is how Black formats it if you put the opening parentheses over there. It's shorter, it's only 3 lines, and it's harder to understand what's happening at a glance. So I think we can agree on that the second example looks better. Now the challenge is, when exactly do you need those parentheses, and when can you omit them? Because putting those parentheses out in all the places is going to not really help. So the challenge is coming up with a single, simple rule that tells Black when we need those optional parentheses and when we don't, without relying on humans. And personally, I just couldn't figure this simple rule out. If you have ideas, I'm happy to talk to you later. Yeah, assert statements. Just look at that thing. That's all I'm going to say about that. And the last thing that's kind of hard is comments. Comments are hard for 2 reasons. Number one, they're not really part of the syntax tree. They're not really first-class citizens in the syntax tree. So the parser that Black uses, which is also included in CPython itself and the Python standard library, this is a snippet of the parser library. Each node in the syntax tree has a base class, and there's this prefix attribute on the base class that contains all white space before a node and potentially all comments before a node as well. So let's look at an example. Let's look at this completely arbitrary example from our test suite, for example. It's a simple function, doesn't do anything, but someone decided to put the pylint pragma on a separate line because it looks better. This is the syntax tree that Black sees. The details are not very important. What I want you to take away from this is there are lines with all caps identifiers, and they usually have 2 parameters. The first one is the prefix, and the second one is the actual value of the node. So in that case, the highlighted line corresponds to the pass statements, and it has 4 spaces as a prefix because it's indented by 4. Kind of terrible, I know. So where do you want the comment to end up, right? The comment refers to the function. So it should be somewhere over here, right? Close to the function definition. No, actually it's down there. It's completely unrelated, just happens to be there. And when you're Black and you're trying to be simple about this, it's kind of hard to correlate that comment, separate it out from all the indentation and the backslash ends and whatever else is going on in there, and attach it to the function signature. So that's number 1 problem with comments. The number 2 problem is it's kind of hard to know when humans intended them to go. So let's take this example. Super simple code. Let's assume that this is a really long, complicated math expression, and we annotate it with an integer type expression. If we assume that this is long and Black has to break it apart, and this is kind of what you'll get. It's obvious that the comment refers to the entire expression because it's the type of the expression, so it should go at the end of the expression, right? Simple. Now let me change this example very slightly. I'm just going to change the contents of the comment. Instead of a type int, it's going to be no QA. So where would you put the no QA now? Would you put it on the beginning of the line? Or on the first part of the expression? Or the second part of the expression? Or the entire one? I have no idea. Depends on what no QA actually means. I hope this gives you a glimpse of what the real problem is. So what Black does is it implements a bunch of heuristics that are kind of simple, kind of easy to understand, and sometimes it will mess up. So when you do reformat your entire code base, look out for comments that are special, because Black might put them in the wrong places. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for paying attention. I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference for inviting me and organizing the conference in the first place. I think it was awesome. And yeah, you can download the presentation over there. Thanks. Any questions? It was easy, yeah?
How do you manage the opinion when you decide to which format you want to choose for Black? I mean it's definitely that there are going to be a lot of opinion sessions, so how do you make that?
Straightforward answer to that. It's usually, there are like 4 people contributing to Black right now, and our opinions kind of matter. And if you want to change Black, you have to convince us, or at least some of us, that your opinion makes sense. It's not great, but that's the choice.
Yeah, I have a question that so you already mentioned about like the comment and like the drawbacks about it. I'm wondering whether like this does Black try to like shorten the comment length as well, like the line length of the comments?
So the question was if Black shortens the comment or not. Without understanding what the comment means, that's kind of impossible to do. And understanding the comment basically means Black would have to understand all of the special tooling, and that's like not really feasible. So no, Black does not touch your comments. The only thing it does is it makes sure between the hash sign and the start of the comment, there's at least one space. And then the hash sign is 2 spaces apart from the normal code, except in certain cases, because anyway, that's what Black does. Any more questions? Yeah, Shane?
Do you do code walkthroughs at Facebook still?
Code walkthroughs? What do you mean?
Sorry, I'm very old. In the old days, you get the code up and all the developers would walk through a piece of code together to try and talk about the style.
Yeah, sometimes we do that.
And have you done it yet where you've been using Black to format the code? And has it changed the process?
So the way we rolled out Black at Facebook is we basically said, guys, we need consistent formatting. We've been trying to use YAP for that, and it was kind of terrible, mostly because it was not consistent. So we just rolled it out to most code bases. To some code bases, it's still not rolled out, and it's opt-in. And we have this internal forum called Workplace where people can post, and we have a group for feedback about Black, and that's where people grumble about not agreeing with our opinions, and sometimes they convince us. That's kind of what we do. Does that answer the question?
Well, I was just wondering, does it sort of speed up the process because you've gotten rid of the sort of rubbish within the code so you can focus more on the logic? But
Yeah.
I'd imagine in the beginning there'd be a lot of grumbles about the formatting of Black.
Yeah, I'd like to think so, but it's very hard to measure. It's very hard to be able to come up with graphs and concrete numbers about this. My personal feeling is yes, diffs are consistent, so we can focus on reviewing the logic changes, and also when writing code, you can focus on logic instead of formatting. There's one more over there.
How do you suggest to enforce everyone in your development team to use Black with Black integration with your code editor? Because you suggested that using the code editor integration is much better than using pre-commit. But when we use pre-commit, we have the option to make it a part of installation process. Like we don't make install it once the repository it installs the pre-commit plugins. But how do you make sure that?
So if I understand your question, it's more about how do you configure your developer's environment to make sure the editor automatically formats code, right?
Yeah.
My personal opinion is if you don't use it, it should be painful. Enabling it should be mind-blowing experience. So that's how you encourage people. And then if you're asking about more technical questions, like VS Code pops up a little message saying, "Oh, do you want to install Black?" And then you can just click and you're done. So that's how VS Code does it. It all depends on your development environment. What we do at Facebook is when you install our IDE, then you get it for free because the installation process makes sure of it.
But if your project is open source, so you need to specifically mention that wherever one should contribute to install that previous things.
Yeah, so the way we do it for Black, because Black is also formatted with Black, the way we do it there is we just mention it in the contributing doc. Hey, you should format it with Black, and then yeah, if people don't follow it, then the continuous integration system will reject it.
Thank you.
No worries. Any other questions? Cool. Thanks, guys.